afternoon. Continuing with wedding fashions of the later Victorian period, they follow the styles as they come. So the fashionable weddings in rich families would involve the bustle dresses in the 70s, then the natural form dresses in the early 80s. The second bustle, the Belle Epoque, everything that happens in fashion is reflected in wedding dresses. So that's what we have, and there is absolutely no notion of the wedding dresses lagging behind or having some sort of, let's say, historicizing feel to them. So we have the fashion plates from the 70s first, showing classical dresses of the early bustle period, with a very pronounced bustle, with a lot of decorations, with the chignon style of hairdo. Of course, they are all in white, and you have the veils as decoration, and you have a lot of flower decorations for the hair, for the dress itself, for the bouquets. So flowers are very, very popular here. Then in the late 70s and in the 80s, you have the natural form, very often with the train, so the so-called princess dresses, worn with veils, with long trains. Many fashion plates show such costumes. Quite often, a woman wearing a wedding dress in a fashion plate is accompanied by another woman who's supposed to represent the mother of the bride, so the most important guest at the wedding, who would also be wearing a smart, fashionable dress, of course in a different color and perhaps a bit more modest because of her age. We have such fashion plates in the 80s. With the second bustle period, we have two women. One is wearing a bridal dress, another is wearing fashionable costume. This could be the mother of the dress, or one more thing, this could be the bride herself dressed up for the clothes, for the so-called going away clothes, because of the great popularity of the honeymoon throughout the 19th century. So after the ceremony and after the wedding breakfast, the newlyweds would say goodbye to the guests and depart on their honeymoon. So the wife, the new bride, would very often have another set of clothes, which would be new and fashionable and modern, and these would be the clothes she would use to go for the honeymoon. So in some cases, the fashion plates may actually show the same woman twice. So like it's the bride dressed for the ceremony, and then it's the same bride dressed for the going away clothes, for the honeymoon. This was extremely popular. Of course, the length and the destination depended on the wealth of the family, but it was practically unheard of not to go even for a few days, like a weekend, so that basically so that the marriage could be consummated. Here we have the Belle Epoque fashion plates, again with some more costumes in the background. In the first case, it's probably those going away clothes, or perhaps this is the mother of the bride. The other fashion plate shows clearly an older woman accompanying the bride, so this is, we may assume, the mother of the bride. Everything is fashionable. The sleeves, the general silhouette, It's just the color, the color and the accessories that are adapted for the situation. Here we have a portrait of Victoria's youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice, who was of course the last of the family to get married, and as I said before, as a special treat she could reuse the lace from Victoria's own wedding dress. We also have more and more photographs, because this was such an important occasion that even people of relatively modest means might want to have a photograph as a souvenir of their wedding. And if we look at the photographs, we can see that the real people in real life not always chose to follow the fashion plates. So a woman might be married in smart, fashionable clothes that would later be reused probably for other occasions. We have basically rather modest clothes. In the Edwardian period, we have, of course, they are fashionable, but they are not special. So fashionably dressed people, but not really with all the trimmings that you can find in fashion plates. However, if the wedding was expensive and happened in the high society, you might have situations like here in the photograph, when the bride is wearing everything that a bride could wear, plus there are some bridesmaids accompanying her dressed in matching clothes. Note the hats of the bridesmaids, they are so fashionable in the Edwardian period that of course the bridesmaid would wear them. The broad-brimmed hats with especially broad crowns, they are quite typical for the period. And the last photograph also shows women wearing such dresses with hats. So the newlyweds are in the center. With some family members surrounding them. So that's the situation with the weddings. I already mentioned that one type of special clothes basically never features in fashion plates, and this is maternity clothes. They are not advertised. Generally, the idea was that women wore undress when they were heavily pregnant, because they were not advised to go out and participate in any formal entertaining or any formal occasions shortly before the birth. So there were no special clothes designed for pregnancy. The idea was to camouflage their condition for as long as you could, and later to stay at home and wait for the child to be born. We have two more things: the presentation at court and the funerals and mourning clothes. And let's start perhaps with the presentation at court, because this is slightly shorter subject. The presentation at court was of course reserved only for the aristocratic women. This was the most important milestone for a young woman apart from marriage. This might happen once in their lives, or perhaps twice, once when she was accepted into the adult society. So she was a debutante being introduced to the court, and the second time after she was married, she was introduced by her mother-in-law. The idea was that the young woman had to be introduced by somebody who was already the member of the court. So the idea was to prevent, let's say, upstarts or nouveau riche from introducing their daughters into the court. This was an important occasion because this was not only the ceremony itself, which also included very special clothes that we'll discuss in a moment, but the result was being invited to several balls in the season, and of course the most important purpose of this for the young woman and her family was to find an appropriate husband, so that perhaps next year the young woman could be introduced again as a wife of an aristocrat. So the custom evolved in late 17th and 18th centuries. It became more and more formalized, also including the clothes. Everything was dictated by court protocol, so there were actually very strict rules as to what the women should be wearing, what kind of colors, decorations, fashions, everything. So a few times each year there were special ceremonies held at the royal court, the so-called drawing rooms, in which the monarch would greet the debutantes at the court. And this is really the kind of fashion that was so formalized and so fossilized that it tended to lag behind fashion, especially in the first 20 years of the 19th century. We have the court fashions clearly lagging behind. So we do not really have the neoclassical period because the royal court did not accept Napoleonic fashions. They still continued to wear 18th century hoop skirts, the panier dresses, like the royal court of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Of course, women wanted to wear fashionable dresses with the elevated waistlines. So the first 20 years of the 19th century really show most ridiculous fashions in the form of court dresses with elevated waistlines and the hoops and the panniers. So they look quite ridiculous, but this was what was worn because of the court protocol. You had to follow the court protocol. Some things were obligatory. So of course the debutantes wore white. The ladies who were already members of the court could wear other colors, but white was still considered a very popular, very appropriate color for the court. The debutantes had to wear white dresses with feathers in their hair decoration. So feather headdress was absolutely obligatory throughout the 19th century. The debutantes had to wear feathered headdresses. There were some rules regarding to how many feathers there should be, but some sort of feather headdress was obligatory. Another thing that was obligatory was a train. Again, we have different ways of arranging the train. It could be integrated into the dress itself. It could be an extra layer of fabric, either attached at the waist, so like behind the belt, or at the shoulders. So there are different ways to do it, but there had to be a train. And actually the length of the train was specified in the court protocol, so you couldn't just wear any kind of train. It had to be long enough to suit court protocol. There were very strict regulations. The dress was the most formal of all formal dresses, with very short sleeves, the low décolletage, and long gloves. There were flowers involved, usually either as a bouquet or as the decorations for the dress itself. And the whole ceremony looked like a long line of debutantes going up to the monarch. So first the kings before Victoria, and then of course when Victoria came to the throne she continued that. The monarch would wait in the room, and each of the debutantes would come up. She would curtsy very low, and one of the courtiers would actually read out her name, like who this young woman was, and then she would back out of the room. This took very long hours of waiting for a very short moment of the introduction itself. But as I said, this resulted in invitations to other occasions. Jewelry, of course, especially white jewelry for the debutantes, diamonds, pearls, fans, white satin shoes. These things were lace, very popular. We have some fashion plates showing those dresses, and definitely you can see how much they lag behind in the neoclassical period. Also for the men, as you can see here, we have a fashion plate showing a woman and a man is also wearing something that belongs more in the 18th century than the 19th. So those kind of embroidered clothes with lace, decorations to the shirt and the bicorn hat and the breeches. This was the fashion that was basically fossilized in the previous epoch. Then, after the death of King George III, of course, this was the moment when the regency ended and the Prince Regent was crowned as George IV. The fashion of the court started catching up with general fashion. So we have finally the dresses without the panniers. We have the narrower dresses following the kind of late neoclassical fashion in the early 20s, and then the romantic fashions later on. We have some fashion plates from the early 20s showing basically fashionable dresses adopted for the use of the court. So with the feathered headdress, with the trains, with the flower decorations, and then in the 30s we have romantic dresses with very emphasized sleeves and very elaborate headdresses. And here in the two fashion plates you can actually compare two types of formal dresses, two types of full dresses. So like a regular formal dress for a ball or a dinner or a dance versus the court dress, which is like the top formality available. They tend to follow the fashion throughout the 19th century. I have some images, one actually showing Queen Victoria accepting the debutantes, and another which shows a line of debutantes waiting to be introduced to the Queen. And then in the at the turn of the century and in the Edwardian period, we have some photographs showing the ladies wearing court dresses before or shortly after they were introduced. So to commemorate on this important occasion. And you can see that the same rule applies. These are modern fashionable dresses of the period adapted for the use. So they are in white collar, they all have the trains, they all have the feathered headdresses, and they all have the flowers, so the bouquets. So what we have here are turn of the century and Edwardian dresses with the shape of the sleeves and the general silhouette following the fashions, but the accessories and the prescribed elements following the court protocol. These regulations were basically used throughout the 19th century. And the last thing to discuss are the mourning clothes and the rules of etiquette connected with funerals and honoring of the dead. And we continue in a moment.